Hello, good evening, and welcome to Intentional Conversations podcast. This is a special episode. We call it our reunion episode because we are celebrating 5 years of bringing this virtual learning experience to the broader community so that we can learn with and from you. And together we can make a difference in society. And so we're so excited that you're here with us today. We're just giving it a moment or two to build up critical mass of our audience who are joining us from two different places. Many of you are aware that we have a live audience that will join us by registering in advance and then being a part of our Zoom community. But then we also go live on LinkedIn. So shout out to the LinkedIn folks. We know that many of you catch our show by LinkedIn and whatever place you are connecting with us. We are so glad you're here. We have been expecting you, and we look forward to a rich conversation this evening. I want to let you know that for those who I am just now getting an opportunity to be connected with this evening, I am Dr. Nika. My pronouns are she, her. I am the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC. Shout out to the NWC team, by the way, who does an incredible job week after week after week and have done so for the past 5 years to bring this great experience to each of you. And we're so grateful to have you a part of our community. I want you to know that at NWC, we truly value disability inclusion. And as such, we have enabled the closed caption feature for those that may see that as a feature that will enhance your experience this evening. We also want you to know that here at NWC, we believe in community. And so if you're part of our Zoom format, we want you to go to the chat, let us know where you're joining the conversation from. Use that chat as a way to extend proximity by sharing your thoughts, your sentiments, resources, anything that you feel like would add value to today's content and discussion. I also want to welcome you on LinkedIn to do the same. Go to the comment section. My team is watching that closely, and we're bringing in all of the great insight that you're sharing, your sentiments, your thoughts, your appreciations to our speakers today, so that we all can be connected in one singular fashion. I also want you to know that here at NWC is really important to us when you show up. And so if you're here and you're in our Zoom community, if you would like to have your cameras on, we welcome smiling faces. But we also know that sometimes folks could be multitasking, and that's fine as well. We're just glad you're here in any capacity. If you have a resource that you think would be of value to this broader community as we go through our evening session tonight, I hope that you will share that with us. We want to be connected, and we are so appreciative of the time that you all are putting in to be with us this evening for a special episode of Intentional Conversations as we celebrate 5 years. This is our reunion episode. And so welcome again. I hope you enjoy the show. Let the conversations begin, indeed, and that is precisely what we're about to do. I just want to welcome you again if you're just tuning in. I am Dr. Nika Wright, pronouns she, her, founder, lead principal consultant for NWC, and you have joined Intentional Conversations reunion episode. So for those of you who may not be familiar, what does that mean, a reunion episode? We have been going for 5 years now, not only 5 years with our VodCast, but in the most recent years, I would say probably the last 3 or so years, we've also instituted a podcast version of Intentional Conversations where we extract the audio and we make it available in podcast capacity for wherever you like to get your podcast content. We know that people like to get content on the go, but we also know there's a community of folks that like to hear it live, like to be a part of the discussion and the energy and the interaction, and we're always grateful for that. Intentional Conversation typically happens every Friday, except this Friday. We're celebrating Good Friday, so we're taking a break this particular Friday, but it happens routinely on Fridays from the 11 o'clock to 12 noon hour Eastern Standard Time, and we have different guests that will come on, and we'll chop it up around topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, justice, accessibility, all the things, right, that fall under that broad umbrella of those powerful words: diversity, equity, and inclusion. We aren't afraid to say it here. And we intersect that type of conversation with dialogue around business, leadership, and all the things that we know are really important to society in terms of humanity, and allowing people to really show up at their best and to have full opportunity for success. And so you can join us every Friday, but we're doing something special this year as part of our 5th year celebration. Every quarter, we bring back guests that we've had on our Intentional Conversations podcast, and we're having special evening episodes like tonight, where we will just catch up and we will just really just engage in a lot of great information that we know that started with the conversations when they first came on the show. So I'm super excited to have our guests for today. And so I want to take a moment, as I normally do. If you're new to our community, it always feels very important to provide a formal introduction of our guest co-hosts by not just talking about them, but reading their official bio. I want to give you just a snippet of their accolades, their credentials, their experiences, how in which they show up to this conversation so that you can know that they're well qualified and well vetted. And also so that you can get a little bit of additional insight into the wonderful minds of these individuals that are joining us today. So that is what I'm about to do. And by the way, if you desire to connect with this community outside of this hour, then drop your LinkedIn information into the chat. Let us know where you are. We'll look you up. My team will share my information. And I certainly want to be in community with each of you. So I'm going to start with Emmanuel Kulu, and I'm going to read his bio, then I'm going to go on to John Graham. Emmanuel Kulu Jr. is an African historian, best-selling author, TED Talk speaker of a Cameroonian descent, Zulu Bantu tribe. Based on his thorough research, Kulu created a historical fiction adventure series based on true events. I, Black Pharaoh, Rise to Power, and I, Black Pharaoh, Golden Age of Triumph. Kulu founded AAARIA, which stands for Ancient African Antiques Research Institute of America, with the mission of creating a middle and high school curriculum of African studies. In 2022, Kulu delivered a powerful TED Talk that was entitled Untold, the Golden Age of Africa. I really look forward to delving into conversation with him. He is joining the conversation today from Buffalo, New York. So welcome, welcome, welcome to Emmanuel Kulu. I'll now formally introduce our next guest co-host, John Graham, who is a renowned for helping global companies discover their essence. As a humanity practitioner, I love that. I so love that. And provocateur, his work centers on improving the lived experiences of marginalized employees by connecting the dots between our history and modern day realities. While Graham has been featured in Forbes, USA Today, and the New York Times for his best-selling book, Plantation Theory, the Black professional struggle between freedom and security. His compelling oratory has led to invitations to speak at prominent organizations, including Google, LinkedIn, Prudential, Mayo Clinic, and many, many more. He is joining the conversation today from Dallas, Texas, which is his home, where he resides with his family. And I want you all to find those accolades, those words of affirmation, find the emojis, the reactions, all the things, right? I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I want you to let these gentlemen know how appreciative we are to have them here with us as I add them to the spotlight. And I will invite them to actually greet you in their own way. And they know, because they've been here before, that we have a tradition. And that tradition is you need to share something with us that we would not know from hearing your bio, which we've just done, or from looking at your LinkedIn profile. And because you shared something special with us last time, we're going to even challenge you more so to share something new, maybe a new experience, maybe something else that has really been eye-opening for you since your last visit to the show. And so I'm going to start with you, John, just because you're in the center of my screen right now, these Hollywood squares of the three of us. And welcome, friend. I'm so glad you're here.
Hey.
Thank you to both of you for saying yes to our invitation to return. We never take that lightly. And I'm so excited to be in community with you. So, John, greet us in your own way.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me back. It is an absolute pleasure, and it's been amazing to watch how you've grown and how you continue to feed us with so much great content and great conversations that are highly intentional. So thank you. I have been doing a lot, but most recently, I have returned from Ghana for my first trip back to back home to the motherland. So full circle moment for me in that I'm a double alumnus of Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, the oldest degree granting HBCU in the country, of which Osegufo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah is an alumni as well.
Yes.
And so for me, it was a full circle moment to see the living legacy of an alumnus from the very place I walked, hallowed grounds that he walked many years before me. To see what he went on to do post graduation. So on the one hand, it made me feel like, damn, I didn't do much with my life. On the other hand, it's like I haven't liberated the country, but but I've done some things. But at the same time, it was just phenomenal to see that imprint and impact he's made on the continent. So yeah, that's probably the latest for me.
Oh, absolutely. So we were sharing before we went live that my family, we have a trip that's scheduled for Ghana at the end of June on into the beginning of July. And so I am going to be hitting you up, as I mentioned before. But I think that a lot of people may not be familiar with that piece of history that you just shared for us and the
Mm.
connection point to the HBCU here in the States that has influenced a lot of what's happening there. And so I'm grateful that we are, perhaps providing some history that's really worthy of sharing to our community this evening. So thank you so much, John. And we are going to talk a little bit about your trip to Ghana because I just, especially during a time right now, I have a feeling that it is very life changing. You said that that was how you described your experience. And I think that when we are able to touch the soil this day and time, it does have a deeper meaning, probably, just because of all that's going on. So I would love to kind of hear a little bit more about that. But before we do so, Emmanuel, I want to bring you into the conversation. Welcome back. Thanks so much for being here. You have had some pretty big wins and some new developments since the last time that you shared with our community. So I would love to give you an opportunity to greet the audience in your own way.
Yes, yes. Greeting in Sabona. That's what we say in Zulu, which means hello and greetings to you. We've been doing a lot at Ancient African Antiquities Research Institute of America. We've instituted a new curriculum titled HEAL. As mentioned before, I'm an African historian. I'm also the CEO and founder of ARIA, which is mentioned Ancient African Antiquities Research Institute of America. And what we're basically doing, HEAL is human, equality, access, and leadership. Which is somewhat of a spin-off to DEI, so to speak. But we are trying to bring everyone back into the space that we all come from Africa. We're actually
Yeah.
doing a current seminar that's going to be One Race, the Human Race, which brings everyone into the spectrum that we all originated from Africa. And the only difference between human beings is heat and ice and the different types of food and dialects that we spoke. Other than that, that is what unifies us. So that is what we're diving into now. And in these high political times that you spoke about that we're dealing with now, they definitely need to get this information about heal so that this country can actually heal.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And I share with both of you that as we were sitting down looking through our roster over the past 5 years of our guest speakers that have come to share with our community, when I ran across both of your names, I immediately thought, oh, this would be such a great pairing. And hopefully this audience is already picking up on why. There's great synergy into how you both show up to the work that you care deeply about. So I know that today's conversation is going to be really rich. And you are accustomed to us, having questions in advance so we have a landing place, but y'all know how we do. We're just going to take the conversation in whatever direction that feels right in the moment. And so I want us to all make sure that we're taking that liberty. I do want to start with Emmanuel. I want to give you a chance to kind of talk a little bit further about the work that you're doing. And specifically, I know that your work has a lot of challenges, in terms of the long held misconceptions about African history and its role in the origins of humanity. And you are very vocal about helping to provide corrections to the misinformation that people have been held onto for so long. So, can you give us a sense of exactly how you like to go about correcting those narratives and why it's important to correct them in the first place? Some people would say, well, why would you care so much? Just let people believe what they're going to believe. And then, secondly, what impact do you hope that your research and your novels and all of your collective work will have on global perceptions of Africa?
Well, are campaigning currently the Global African Awakening. And you'll constantly, if you follow my page on LinkedIn, you'll constantly hear the slogan, "We must restore the truth," which is two different
Mhm.
things that we're trying to push the narrative of truth. The global African awakening is that everyone comes from Africa. As we just mentioned earlier, out of East Africa, if you look into science, they talk about how Lucy was the first woman that was ever discovered. If you go into biblical studies, you're talking about ancient Egypt was the first mega civilization, and everything spread from there. You turn around a dollar bill, what do you got? You see a pyramid. You also see the Eye of Horus on the top of the pyramid. That stretches all the way back to ancient Kemet. And Kemet means land of the blacks. And all of these different things that we talk about, when you talk about racism, when you think about one being hated for their skin complexion, we actually do a conference in our conferences where we separate people by their births, by the dates they were born,
Mm-hmm.
by the months particularly. And these individuals who are born in a certain month, they get a closer shot to the basket. And everyone else gets like a distant shot, right? And we tell everybody take their shot. And the people who kind of got a layup, so to speak,
Yeah.
that stands for privilege. So we're kind of using these different analogies to help people understand how ridiculous racism is. No one can help when they were born. No one can help how or what complexion they were born. No one can control that. And to be hated based on these things, it's really a ridiculous thought. And historically, people divided by culture or religion. Now,
Mm-hmm.
since about the 1600s, around the time of the Spanish Inquisition, you started to see people dividing by skin color, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So before I believe it's 1681, there was no such thing as white people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something very, very important to understand that this is a construct. And white supremacy does not even cover all quote unquote white people. So all of this
Mm-hmm.
different information that we're trying to bring forth through HEAL is to really help people to understand that many immigrants who came to this country who are now labeled as white were told by these rich few numbers of slave owners that their enemies were black and brown communities. And this is what led to the racism on the lower level. And they preached to these immigrants at that time that if you oppress these people, eventually you could become just like us, who were the slave owners at that time, who were the very much minority, or what we today call the 1% who rule the world.
Yeah.
So it's deep. We can go on and on about this, but this is just some of the intricate work we're doing to bring these knowledges to the forefront, so that with knowledge comes power, comes wisdom, and hopefully that brings change.
Yeah, and it's such an important conversation to have, particularly now more than ever, when there is a huge movement of erasure that's taken place and of sowing and very intentionally misinformation. And so I love the fact that the timing has worked out for you to be able to come back and reshare and even amplify a lot of what you talked about when you were first on the show. I recall it being so fascinating that I said to you at the end, we're going to have to invite you back because there's so much more to unpack here. So hopefully we'll get to do a little bit more unpacking today. So, okay, I want to bring you into the conversation, John, because, when I think about all that we're experiencing right now, and even just talking about the erasure of Black people and African history, that is so blatant right now. I mean, it's happening in a way that I don't think any of us could have expected. What was it like to be on the motherland and to experience Ghana the way that you did with the audience in which you did? And I'm hoping that maybe you can share a little bit about why you were there, who
Sure.
you were in the company of, because yes, this was a pretty big deal. You tried to talk about it so cool, but I was like, So
Yeah,
we want to
yeah,
have a little bit of that experience by just listening to you share your experience.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I was invited as part of a global Circle for Healing and Reparations initiative that brings a bunch of different brilliant minds, dignitaries from the African Union, local government in Ghana, as well as thought leaders, professors, psychologists, all convening to really work through not only the pre-colonial history but the transatlantic slave trade history. Who was involved? What were the conditions? What were the impacts? And then post transatlantic slave trade and even emancipation, and then thinking through what are the necessary healing requirements as part of a global reparations package. And so, it was intense in that regard, but some of the things that you come to understand is when you do this work and you're a student of history, is that human nature as a default was always at play when we talk about social hierarchies, right? So even pre-colonization, we had our own social hierarchies based on proximity to power, control, and access to resources and so forth, but not in the same context as a Eurocentric dominance mindset. And so, when you walk through that history in the course of these dialogues, and I'm sitting next to folks and listening to folks who have, sat in the Vatican and presented documented evidence of the Vatican's admission that, the trade was illegal, immoral, right, against the laws of humanity, laws of nature, civil laws, and even religious doctrine. And they admitted it, right? It's documented that they acknowledged that in the 1500s. And yet, and still, big business took precedent there. So all of that to say, you combine that with this experience of putting bare feet on sand and listening to the ocean and looking at the view, knowing this was the point at which, our ancestors were marched from 100 miles plus from the interior to this very point, and this very view I'm looking at was the last view of the homeland that they saw. Right. And then you listen quietly, you hear the whispers and the waves of the ancestors, you feel that presence. So no, it's certainly transformative, but it really reaffirmed the work that I do in terms of talking about these constructs that we still operate in today that have been rebranded and, politely marketed to soften the reality of what it's still built on in its very, very nature. And when we think about that hierarchical structure, status is very much a key theme that's always been a part of it. And yes, you have your intragroup status, and then you have your, outer group status. And the reality is there's never been in history a dominant group who's given up their position willingly, right?
Yeah.
So when we think about that in the context of the work we're doing and what we're seeing in the headlines, we're seeing a dominant group who's trying to cling on to power, right, by very much doing what they can do in a construct they've built and designed. But at some point, the inertia, right, the momentum, and this collectivism and this waking up of the global majority is becoming clearly evident. So.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you bring up. We haven't seen that. We haven't seen a dominant group in power that has willingly just surrendered. And do you think that the conversation of sharing power is resonating with some folks, though?
I'll simply say I have not seen a reference point for it yet. Unfortunately, right? And so these are the kinds of questions you really dig into when you talk about global reparations, right? When you think about the diaspora and that impact, we can make a lot of cases. We have tons of evidence, receipts, and so forth. However, we can only point to historical reference of what's actually happened where power is transferred. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I would venture to say that we are experiencing more. It's definitely much more intensified in this political climate, to where it's certainly indicative of we have not made as much progress as I think that we all would like to believe. So when we talk about global reparations, and I want to get your thoughts on this too, Emmanuel, but I'll start with you, John, since you kind of took us to this very explicit point. There's some that sit back and maybe they aren't quite as aware of all the intricacies and the complexities that would lead to trying to decipher what is appropriate, right? How do we really structure something that can work and that can feel commiserate with the experience, the torture, the harm, all the things, right? And some would say nothing. There is nothing. And then others would say, it may not erase everything, but it certainly helps. When there's so much in this spectrum of the conversation, how do you really go about bringing some commonalities to help decipher decision making and a position of cohesion around this very complex topic?
It's a tremendous question, and I'm glad you asked, because there was a session that we did. It turned into like a 6-hour session dedicated to one question, and that was how do we restore trust amongst each other, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's fascinating that became, so this was at the end of the week. When I arrived, I was in a conversation with a sister, and I told her, again, not knowing what was coming at the end of the week in terms of that session, but I said, I fear that the question that, well, I'll never find an answer to before I transition out of this life experience is, how do we restore trust amongst each other? And so
Yeah.
to have a 6-hour session with some of the most brilliant minds, and again, we're trying to find very simple things that we can do to as universal agreement points, right? Like, what are those things that we do to communicate trust and safety, right? Whether it's big T trust or little T trust, right? Like, trusting you to do things like ensure that when we're in a room together and it's just us, that there's some acknowledgement, I see you, some recognition. That's very little T. But when it comes to like ensure that my from a communal standpoint, that we agree to ensure that we are safe amongst each other and in community. And so this is a question that did not receive an answer, right? And when you start to look at the different expressions of trust across the diaspora, continental Africans, like we all settled on the nod as being this thing, right? Like, to the point where you see somebody else you don't know, but you acknowledge their presence, and somebody's like, "Do you know them?" And I'm like, "No, I don't." But that's a thing. But even the nod on the continent across different countries look different than the states. British, Afro Europeans versus Afro Latinos or Afro Caribbean, different communications or gestures of agreement and safety and trust. Point being is, we have to find that common thread first as part of the healing process. The reparations process, when it comes to economic damages, and I think the figure I saw by the Brattle Group in 23 was around 171 trillion, right? Now, right, and that factors in centuries worth of damages, psychological damages that still have epigenetic impacts today. Point being, I think, and quite on point, we couldn't have the reparations conversation if we don't talk healing first.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because without that occurring, it goes to the question that I just kind of presented. Will there ever be a point where there'll be full satisfaction? You know,
Yeah.
and I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think that there's a lot that can help heal some wounds. But I do wonder if there's ever going to be a full realization of satisfaction. And it certainly can't happen, to your point, without building that trust. And so thank you for sharing your insight there. Curious, Emmanuel, your thoughts on global reparations, and has that been a part of some of the conversations you've been holding with folks that you've been educating through all the work that you do through ARIA and beyond?
Absolutely. The global reparation would probably be over $200 trillion, as he mentioned, 171. The Africans that built this country, I've always say that the same hands that built the pyramids built the White House, same black hands that did so. But also we must understand the perspective of the oppressor as well. And that
Yeah.
perspective is black ignorance is a $1 billion industry.
Hmm.
And also black oppression is a $1 billion industry.
Hmm.
So all of these things that were built off of the backs of these African people who were oppressed and suppressed, it really shows how powerful African people are to have thrived and survived and still growing in great numbers. But what has also hurt the African diaspora is the diaspora divide, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and there's been cultural divides between Africans and African Americans, and this is something that's kind of dear to my heart because I'm both. My mom was from the south side of Chicago, and my father is from Cameroon. So
Yeah.
I share in the pain and the joy of the African kings and queens and the monarchs
Yeah.
and the scholars, and and I also share in the pain of colonization the exploitation of resources, of gold, the ivory, the coltan that we use on our phones to talk to people comes from the Congo. The chocolate and that comes from the cocoa that comes from Ghana. That there's these young farmer boys who've never tasted coffee a day in their life. I share in that pain that they deal with. I also share in the pain that we've dealt with segregation, with redlining, blockbusting,
Yeah.
lynching, you know, Willie Lynch. We've dealt with so much on the entire diaspora. And this is why I deal with the global African awakening, globally, understanding how colonization, the transatlantic slave trade affected all of African people. In fact,
Hmm.
what happened in America was mirrored right in South Africa with apartheid. So a lot of these exact things that happened in America, America has been leading the journey through the media. When George Floyd riots started to happen and everything, the uprisings and Black Lives Matter began to rise, what happened is these different movements began to rise in all parts of the world of Black people who were being oppressed everywhere.
Everywhere.
So literally, I think it's very, very important that people on this side of the globe use their voices to continue to speak up, speaking through the media, speaking through literature. There was times where they used to say that if you wanted to hide something from Black folks, you put it in a book. But now you have myself, you have John, you have various other African scholars, yourself, Nika, who are
Yes, yes,
writing, who are
yes.
speaking the truth and screaming it loudly.
Yeah.
And we're being heard. And the question I always get is from my Caucasian brothers and sisters, they always say, well, Kulu, how can this information, how can we get this to my cousin who's so and so, who may be racist, so to speak? And I say, well, once you come to the seminar to receive this information, it's up to you to take it back to your community.
Yeah.
Take it
Yeah.
back to your community and you teach your community. They may not show up here. They may not be right here with us on NWC right now. But guess what? For those who are here, it's on you to take it back to your community. And this is what I mean by the global awakening. So, from that perspective, when it comes to reparations, I mean, $200 trillion, if you think a oppressor is going to easily cough that up, it's going to be a battle. It's going to be a battle. It's been a battle. It's not anything that they don't know. They know the facts. They know that African people have, in free manual labor, built this very nation that you see. The countless discoveries, the countless inventions, countless innovations, despite oppression and suppression. I mean, and then the mineral gain that they gained from Africa is a whole nother thing. So
Yeah.
we can talk about global reparations. I mean, it would bankrupt the entire Eurocentric society to
Yeah,
do that.
exactly. And I think that's why I posed the question that I did. And I also was a part of another conversation. I'm trying to recall who it was with, but it was about, the reparations discussion. And someone kind of mentioned, and I'm paraphrasing here, that we're never going to be able to fully realize that. And so is our energy better spent on just trying to stop what continues to happen this day while we're asking for reparations? If we don't get people to a place where they stop it, it's just going to continue. So does that mean we're going to ask for more reparations down the road? And I don't know the answer to all of that, but I do know that we have to keep at least impressing upon people the severity of the stories and of the reality that existed that so many people want to shut their eyes to. And that in and of itself is privilege. It's invisible to those who have it. And you don't have to necessarily think about this and how it continues to impact you and generations after generations, because that's not the situation for those individuals. And so I my hope is that if anything, we can stop what we're currently seeing. And maybe once that has become something we all are conditioned to, is, that racism no longer exists, then perhaps could we live in a society where a conversation around reparations would become feasible? Um, anyway, I'm interested in seeing how we continue to address that topic. I want to talk now about, I want to go deeper into the diaspora divide, because sometimes I know that that is a criticism. We don't talk about that within our own. We always want to talk about how, the racism issue against us, but we won't talk about the infighting and some of those other issues. Why do you feel that it's important to highlight that also as part of the narrative?
Well, the diaspora divide is one of the things where has really brought a lot of miseducation in regards to the transatlantic slave trade. Whose fault was it? Was it the Africans'
Yeah.
fault? Was it the Europeans' fault? How did it all take place? Well, let's just say this: a very small minority group were responsible of Africans were responsible for partaking in the slave trade. There are also groups of Europeans who were capturing African people. There are
Mhm.
stories still to this very day, and I'm sure Brother John can testify to this based on his recent trip to Ghana, of people being afraid to go to the sea before they would disappear. And those
Yeah.
stories are still existing to this day. So there
Mm.
were Africans that were stolen. There were Africans that were sold as well. But the moral of the story that I believe is that slavery has always existed since the beginning of time. But this brutal form of slavery in the African continent, you had people who were, captured. They were called POWs at the time, and they could
Mhm.
become citizens to that current tribe that they lived in. But they would live in servitude for a certain season, right? They would serve someone for 10 plus years, prove their loyalty, and become a citizen of that particular nation. So, this is how African civilizations typically dealt with their POWs. But what happened here in America was less than humane that we've ever seen on the face of the planet in the history of mankind, and where people were labeled three-fifths of a human being just to justify the oppression and the suppression and the building up of a nation. And last
Yeah.
time, Nika, when we spoke about ancient Egypt, we
Mhm.
talked about, you asked me, you said, Kulu, why is that so important? Why do we always talk about Kemet? And I said, well, your Eurocentric scholarship grows off of the back of ancient Egyptian history.
Mhm.
So if they were to say, hey, that this first mega civilization that emerged out of Africa was a Black African civilization, you would have to be acknowledging that the Greeks, the Romans, and the Anglo-American world power today learned from these ancient African people who eventually you enslaved. So history and re-education is so very important. And that's where I start my perspective is educating the miseducated and bringing education to communities that are not normally recognized there.
No, thank you. I remember that conversation well, Emmanuel. And by the way, we are going to add to the chat. My team will drop in the links to the previous intentional conversations that took place with both of these individuals at separate times. And so we had a full hour where it was one-on-one, and I remember both the conversations being so incredibly rich. John, I want to talk about your book, The Plantation Theory. And again, I want to read the full title. I know I shared it when I was doing your bio. The Black Professional Struggle Between Freedom and Security. And in that book, you explore the challenges faced by Black professionals in corporate spaces.
Mhm.
And I remember we talked before about what inspired you to write the book and how it really has been resonating with audiences across different industries. And at that time, it was relatively new. And now the book has been out there for a bit longer. And so I'm just
Mhm.
curious as to what are you seeing and you hearing in terms of how the book has really helped to clarify some things for people, to create a pathway of dialogue that maybe has been meaningful to create change. What are you seeing as some of the takeaways from the book that you put into the world?
Yeah. It's been surreal, honestly, to know that in June, actually Juneteenth, it will be the fourth year since Plantation Theory's release. And the conversations that still occur almost cyclically, Black History Month and Juneteenth, when I get invited to speak about plantation theory and fireside chat, or my recent work of The Cost of the Climb, which is the new baby I'm working on. Um, the conversation really is meant to not help us navigate corporate space or the corporate ladder, as it were, but more so to question the ladder itself. Um, when you recognize how steeped we are in the programming of our foreparents, who struggled and fought for 350 years to gain access, but they didn't
Yes.
have perception or perspective on what was on the other side of the doors they were knocking on. We're the first generation born into that access, navigating with no playbook, right?
Yeah.
And so when you put it into context, and I'm having these conversations with Black employee resource groups and some of the brightest minds in some of the biggest companies in the world, and I ask them, was it your inherent desire to be in the C-suite?
Mm.
Who gave you that charge and that battery pack to climb this ladder? And at the other end, if you knew what was on the other side of those doors, would you still knock? And
Yeah.
these are questions that most of us have never thought to ask, because the mantra was, you're going to go to school, you're going to get a degree, you're going to get a good job, you're going to work 30 years, retire and die. That is all you got to retire, stay Black and die. Those were your only imperatives, right? And so when you start to question and you look at the impact that these climbs are having on our physical, our mental, emotional, spiritual health, reputational health as well, in some cases, you start to ask, is the cost worth the climb?
Yeah.
Is the climb worth the cost? Excuse me. And so I challenge us to start to think about how we're deploying our expertise, how we're deploying this sauce, this knowledge, this passion to companies we don't own, right? Because that's never been the conversation. And now on the other side of access, we're 60 years in. This July it'll be 61 years post Civil Rights Act of 64, and we're still enjoying the trappings, the benefits of access. However, what the cost of access was community. And so now the question becomes, right, because we had community, we didn't have economic access. Well, they said, okay, well, here, have economic access, but you can't have community, because
Right.
both would make you competitive.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So now in the wake, in the backdrop of what we're seeing politically and all that, the question I'm still waiting to hear more people ask is, well, when are we going to start working together, building our own and becoming self-sufficient? That's a deeper conversation that I'm positioning and provoking Black professionals to have.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that, John. And
Yeah.
I love that because off the strength of that, when you think about the Montgomery bus boycott,
Bus boycott. Yeah.
you see the power of unification, where you almost bankrupt a $1 billion industry of the NFTA at that time, and that's the power of community. And they have many Eurocentrics scholarship, as well as we see what some of these companies are doing. They're going to remain nameless today, but by just cutting DEI initiatives and all the things that they're doing, what are we doing to isolate them, to make their business suffer? We have the spending power. We have the spending power. We have global spending power. And if we withheld our funds for some of these companies that we know are intentionally racist, it could change a lot of things. And we can start funneling that into Black and brown communities instead of sending it out.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a phenomenal point. It's funny. I see my dear sister and former guest, Natasha D. Wade, in the building. I recently did the Cost of the Climb speaker session with her team, and it was one of those moments where, when you can put into perspective what's possible with community. And a question that I ask, and I ask a lot of Black ERGs this very question. I say, look, you have people in this ERG that you've come to know over the years. They've welcomed you in. You have community within the context of the company you work at, right? But here's the thing. The first ERG was the church on the plantation. This is where we were first allowed to gather in community, still supervised and sanctioned, right?
Yes.
Well, right. So again, the construct hasn't changed. It's just evolved and the branding's different. So now my question is, who are you engaging with in this ERG outside of work? If the only time you're experiencing community is when you're at work, then that's the problem. Additionally, most of the FANG companies, Silicon Valley tech companies, were founded by people who met each other at work. So my additional question then is, how many of you are viewing these people in here beyond colleagues and now looking at them as co-founders? Because you have all of the intellectual capital right here in every function represented. But at no point do we think community, because we still see each other as competition. So I'm trying to reestablish that, which then brings back that question of how do we reestablish trust? That is the foundation of it all, even to the word community.
And John, I'm sure you've thought about the relevance of what you just shared to what's happening right now in this political climate where ERGs are going away from many organizations. I think it becomes even more imperative to share that narrative and to impress upon people the importance of community and establishing it by any means necessary, because it's not so that they're going to get that within their workplaces these days. I mean, we're seeing it left and right where ERGs are being pulled away. I'm glad that you acknowledged our friend Natasha D. Wade. Let me put that D in there. Yes, she is one of our past guest co-hosts on Intentional Conversations, but she shared in the chat, John spoke at my employer and he asked questions that jacked us up for a while, laughing out loud in a good way though. And then she shared that one of the questions was, who is benefiting from your Black excellence? So this
that's the question.
I get quiet.
And who does it serve?
Looking to learn as well. And when I get quiet, that's when we have hit a point to where, yes, it's resonating, and we need to kind of just sit with that and take it in for a second and not just rush past it. But who is benefiting from, your Black excellence? And that's
Sister Nika, there was a podcast that I watched about a year ago. And it kind of blew my mind about the music industry. And it was talking about just, obviously we know the power of music. Music has started wars. Music has brought people to love. Music has turned people against each other. Music is that powerful. It's a vibration that it sends through the soul and connects with the cerebral cortex. And it just does something to us, right? And then you see how you find out that some of the for-profit business owners were also owners in the music industry. And you kind of see how this minority youth group has been used as a tool to destroy a global youth and a global middle age as well. And these things are tools that have been used against us, strategies that have been used against our youth, against father, against son, mother against daughter, brother against brother, and now this music, Afrobeat, as well as hip hop has gone so far. It's gone bigger than what we can even imagine. I remember when I was a kid, and as you see Buffalo against the world behind me, I'm a diehard Bills fan. I remember growing up in the stadiums, we didn't even hear rap music. We heard rock and roll music throughout the stadiums, but hip hop has become so powerful that now you're hearing it all throughout the entire world. So now whatever is being pushed is not just being pushed to the black community. It's also being pushed to the white community. It's also being pushed to the Arab community. So we have global things that we have to deal with. And again, once we understand that there's issues that affect the diaspora and on top of all other communities, we have to find that common ground to find solutions for it. And that's what DEI was brought into place. But again, we have to start looking at these companies who initiated the DEI and said, we're all for it. We're going to hire all of these African Americans and African American women, and we're going to push this narrative. And then soon a new election comes in and quickly turn their cheek and go a different route. So you're really seeing the true colors of certain people. Now you have to ask yourself, just like the Montgomery boycotts, are we going to continue to trust these dishonest corporations?
Yeah, there's that trust factor coming back to the conversation, and it will continue to do so. This is so good. As you were talking, Emmanuel, what came to mind for me was thinking about Kendrick Lamar and how he used such a moment as the entertainment for the Super Bowl halftime show, and people are still talking about that, how impressionable it was, and you're right. There are some unifiers that I think can help us if we are being strategic and thinking about the right mechanisms and multiple mechanisms. We need all the things, all the different ways and formats to get, our message across, to really take back that narrative. And I mean, like the books that you both are writing and your TED Talk. And I mean, so I'm loving the fact that there is an acknowledgement that our voices are strong. Being strategic and united makes a big difference. Just of late, we've seen that with a lot of the large, brands who have made statements of pulling back in different regards relative to efforts of DEI. And so we need more of that. We need more of that for sure.
Yeah,
We're getting
Sister
close
Nika.
to,
Oh,
yeah,
I'm so
please.
sorry to interrupt.
No, jump in.
Well, the thing about that, right? So I think a really good point was brought up that we're seeing true colors, and what I really want to just center on is that um, the nature of an organization or a company, right? First and foremost, is to ensure its own survival, right? To ensure that it
Mhm.
is solvent. And so what we've seen historically was the use of legislation to enhance economic or business outcomes, right? So in the case of the
Yes.
64 Civil Rights Act, you're denying a significant portion of the labor force access to working for you. Makes perfect sense to let them work for you. And then let's bring women in while we're at it too. And then let's pay everybody less than what we, right, pay everybody else. So there's an economic benefit there. So then when you have all of the legislations and protected identity classes, so forth, there's never been a movement post civil rights or even included in civil rights legislation that did not in some way, shape, or form benefit the economics of the dominant group. Point
Mm,
being, whenever there's a shift, progress or regress, there's an economic benefit to doing so. And what we're living through is the fourth regression of affirmative action since 1964. So it doesn't surprise me, nor do I think we should be surprised. In fact, another conversation with Sister Wade, she clarified in such a way and articulated in such a way what I asked: why are people so upset, especially our folks, so upset about the rollbacks of DE and I when nobody can point to a specific structural or systemic change that has actually benefited us in the last 60 years? When you ask,
mm,
and she says, John, what I think we're seeing or what we're witnessing is the loss of the perception of progress. And I said,
yeah.
if all we had was the perception and that was just enough to keep us from, outwardly walking out or doing whatever, then that's something that we should probably examine even more so.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
So these are the
that's
things that I'm like, DEI
good.
was never intended to do what you think it
Right.
was and not for whom you think it was.
And that's such an important conversation. I
Yeah.
remember in the first quarter, we had on Minda Harts and
I
Tara
love Minda.
Frank and a few other folks. And it was such a rich conversation. And I brought up a question that was presented at the start of the year at a conference I attended with, chief diversity officers, CHROs, all these people that are directly responsible for influencing the work of DEI. And the question that was posed in this very raw moment of reckoning with what had just occurred, this was in January, this is right when,
Still
the new
fresh.
administration is taking place. And the question that was presented to the entire room is, how did we get here? And it was silent for a moment. And then all it took was for one person to be brave enough to say, we are part of the reason that it's here. And then it was a flurry of all kinds of statements. And it was hard to ignore that, yes, there certainly have been a lot of missteps, a lot of assumptions made, a lot of even approaches that maybe at the time felt was the right way, but it did not lend itself towards realizing true transformation. And I think that you're right. There's something to be said for any kind of movement feeling like it's productive and feeling like it gives us hope, right? But we also talk often about there is a keen difference between activity versus impact. What are you going after? Is it just activity with a start and an end date, or are you really going after impact? And I think that we have to ask ourselves that question at every turn, around every decision point, so that we can just remind ourselves of the importance of we have to go deeper. the surface programmatic stuff. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't have any value at all, but we have to go deeper. We have to care about the main thing, get to the crux of the matter, peel back all the layers, right?
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. And is your company the right platform to go deeper on?
yeah.
If your activism is limited to the confines of a corporation, it's already
Yes,
toast. You're cooked.
absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
that's not
Absolutely.
why they hired you.
Yes. And so in some ways, we have to always find the silver lining because,
Sure.
we are used to holding both trauma and joy and being able to, lean into some level of resilience just to be able to survive oftentimes. And so I think that for some of us, the hope aspect is we're holding on to it very deeply because without hope, it's like, well, then what? So while maybe all of the answers haven't fully revealed themselves, um, my message has continued to be we can't give up. We have to keep trying. We have to maintain hope because if we feel defeated before taking that next step, then we are only determining what the demise is going to be. And I'm just not comfortable with that. So yeah,
Yeah.
how do the two of you maintain hope when you are doing your work and you are right in the midst of being exposed to all the things that we see coming at us every single day that can feel very defeating?
My
How do you?
spirituality keeps me grounded. I'm a Christian. I'm a Jehovah's Witness, and I believe that even at the end of all of this, that God will rectify all matters. We also know that every empire that has come has really only lasted less than 500 or 600 years. So we do know eventually change is going to come. And just like Tupac said a long time ago, I may not be the person that brings forth change, but I will spark the brain that will change. And just
Yes,
having that futuristic mentality,
I
working in
agree.
schools or working with these young children, teaching them about the truth, and just seeing their faces smile when they hear about these ancient African queens, and not just ancient African kings, and not just kings and queens, merchants, scholars, physicians, master
Yes.
builders, farmers, because that's the go-to. We were kings and queens. Okay, but we were so much more. I mean, we did so much. We were people of the soil. I did a study, and we talked about how the Gregorian calendar changed a lot of things for the perspective of the new year, because the new year
Mhm.
was originally, around April 21st, and April Fool's Day was based on the perspective that they thought the indigenous peoples were fools for celebrating it around that day. And they found that, in my youth, they found that to be just so interesting. But it's these ancient African and indigenous people, they based everything that they did by nature
Mhm.
in their respect for nature. And as we see how the industrial age has changed the world in such a cataclysmic way, that it has really caused climate change, it's caused extreme pollution in the air, it's poisoned the foods that we eat, the foods that we plant. This is all Eurocentric ideologies. All right. So, in essence, we do have to get back to the holistic way. We do have to see the holistic picture, because what we're just seeing is what you call episodic history. Episodic
Yeah.
history is where you say, we take this part from Africa. We'll say transatlantic slave trade is your history. That's all we're going to talk about for Black history, civil rights, and that's it. That's all Black people contributed. That's episodic. But once you put all of these puzzle pieces into the puzzle, the ancient African scholars, the indigenous people of Australia, the blacks who created the dynasties in ancient China, the black Africans who traveled from Mali to the Americas, and you start putting all these pieces of the puzzles together, and you're finding such beautiful history that's really changing the narrative of how we view Black people on a global level. So I
Mhm.
believe in order to really see these changes happen, we have to start with education and getting these educations to be mandatory in school. And that's the battle that the oppressor will always try to fight against, because they know that knowledge is power and knowledge changes the world.
Oh, so now you went ahead and addressed my final question for the two of you. So I appreciate that. John, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of close this out in whatever way that feels that you're having a lot of energy around. What have I not asked you about today that you want to leave the people with?
Well, I'm still processing Emmanuel's answer. It was tremendous. I think one of the things that I'm super centered on right now is trying to get to the foundational root of the challenge that we've been speaking about all night, which was trust, but also this divide. And when I looked at the self-sufficient Black communities pre-Civil Rights Act, nearly 100 of them, most well known as Tulsa or Greenwood, Black Wall Street. But you had, I mean, Winston-Salem, you had Sweet Auburn and Atlanta, you had, Durham, you had so many. What I saw as the foundational success factor for those communities was strong families, married households. And when you looked at the data and you start to dig in and you say, from Reconstruction to 1978, we were the most married racial group in the country. From 1978 to now, and it was over 85% marital rate. Now, from 1978 to today, we are the least married at 29%. When you look at the correlative quality of life indicators to marriage, it's household income, it's educational outcomes for children, it's health access and outcomes, and life expectancy. And Black folks are at the bottom of all four of those quality of life indicators, as well as marriage. So what I'm looking at is how can we start to restore community by virtue of impacting more marriages, right?
Yes.
And when you build on that foundation of strong households, well, now you can create businesses that serve the needs and provide the goods to those communities and of families, which then gives you economic power to purchase your political representation, which then legislates on behalf of your worldviews, ideals, and beliefs when you control your media and your education. So I'm centered on helping single Black professionals who are seeking marriage or long-term relationships heal before they connect with people. And I'm doing that through a digital platform called Upfront. And the website for those to check that out is upfront.love. And it's a Gen AI led platform. Langston and Zora are your guides of choice to bring you through a 30-day healing journey and then ultimately to connect with those who are also on a healing path. So the bold, audacious mission is 1 million Black marriages by 2030 and make an impact on all those quality of life indicators, and thus bringing back one of our most powerful and strong competitive advantages, and that is the household.
Love that. Love that.
Thank you.
So when I get quiet once again, it's because it's resonating deeply. And y'all, we got more time. So if you have to leave, certainly feel free to leave. And we will close out momentarily, but I just want us to just make sure that we are appreciating what has just been shared. And John, you shared a little bit of this with me just about a year ago, I believe.
Oh yeah.
And we kind of committed to staying in touch on it. And so thank you for today's reminder, because we need to catch up, because I think you're so right. I think you're so right. And if we can fix that, we can fix so much. And so we got to hear more. I'm kind of mad that you're dropping this right at the end of the hour.
I'm ensuring my invite back. That's what that was the down payment on the next episode.
It is definitely done, because you are certainly on to something, and I'm intrigued. So give us the link again, and we're going to put it into chat for those who would like to learn more about it. Let me see if
yeah.
And by the way, we have shared the LinkedIn links for both John and Emmanuel into the chat. So I hope that you will connect with the two of them. They both produce great content. You will not at all be disappointed by having them as part of your network. And did we get it in there? I want to make sure. Upfront.love. Okay, can't wait. Well, I'm running. I'm leaving this conversation to go look up upfront.love.
Yeah, no
Thank you
doubt.
both so very much. I love the work that you're doing. Keep doing the good work. Keep fighting. Keep being hopeful. And I believe that your work matters. Our collective work matters, and your individual work matters. And so I'm just grateful to be in community with both of you. And thanks for helping us
Likewise, thanks.
celebrate 5 years.
Congratulations.
Thank
Congratulations.
you.
Here's
Thank
to
you.
10 more.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you so very
And
much.
many, many
We're
more.
grateful. Thank you all for joining us for the special reunion episode. We hope that we'll see you on our next intentional conversations, which will take place again, not this Friday because it's Good Friday, so we're taking a break, but the next Friday we'll be back with another episode. Until then, if you have appreciated this conversation, look out for the replay and you can share it out with those in your network. Thanks again for being a part of our community. Good evening to you all. Bye-bye.